Well, today I'm going to talk about the art and the science of performance feedback. A recent article which I've written, and if you can get hold of the Human Capital magazine, I also do write for them. And the current month issue, the September issue for the Human Capital, has my article on performance feedback. So if you get time, if you get an access to it, please do go through the article. Well, a lot of people believe that how can something like a feedback be a science and an art? And that's exactly what we are going to discover today in my session. And I'll request Shyam to please run the presentation for the benefit of the participants. So
Yes.
art and science of feedback. So I will be basically taking you through how is giving a feedback an art and how is it a science, and that is what is interesting. So performance feedback is the cornerstone of performance. If you really want your team members to excel, I think the best tool that you have as a leader is to give a performance feedback. ये performance feedback कैसा होना चाहिए, किस तरह से देना चाहिए, इसके बारे में हम presentation में बात करेंगे. But that's the cornerstone. That's on what the entire performance of an employee really depends. And if you want your employees to consistently keep on raising their benchmark of performance, I think there is no better tool than a performance feedback which is candid and which is constructive. But the most unfortunate part is this is the most underrated and the most underutilized tool by the leaders. A lot of times, a lot of leaders feel that giving a performance feedback is a waste of time, or this is something that one needs to understand. Why should I really put an effort in giving a performance feedback? A lot of people feel it's a waste of time and they end up spending not more than 5-10 minutes or 15 minutes to give a performance feedback, because for them, this is one of the formalities that they need to do. Many a times, I've heard people saying that HR वालों ने बोला है performance feedback देना है, चलो आ जाओ यार एक session कर लेते हैं. Let's have a 10-minute performance dialogue. And that's where the whole objective of performance feedback gets killed. The objective of performance feedback is not to tick an item in the checklist. It is not because ये HR वालों ने बोला है या ये करना पड़ेगा या ये organizational mandate है. The objective is to help your employees, handhold them, mentor them, give them the right direction, tell them where they are good and where they are not so good, tell them about their strengths and about their areas of improvement, and help them improve consistently every single day at work. And when we do this, what does it lead to? It leads to a significant improvement in the individual performance, and thereby the team performance, and thereby the functional performance, and thereby the organizational performance. And hence, performance feedback is one of the most important tools that a leader must use at all times to make sure that their teams are performing well and they keep on raising the benchmark of performance every single day at work. So next slide, Shyam. Now let me explain you why do I call it an art and a science, both at the same time. Well, a feedback needs to be articulate. This is something where a leader needs to put a lot of thought. A leader needs to articulate it well. The same message can be given in 10 different ways. And hence it is said that it is not important what is being said, it is important how it is being said. The same rule applies to feedback. At the end of the day, your intent is just not important. Yes, intent is important. Your intent of giving a feedback is really important, but that's not all. How you put across your intent, how do you communicate, is something which is of an equal importance. So one needs to be articulate, and that's where I say this is an art. Second, one needs to be creative. One size fits all approach does not work. You got to be creative to communicate your feedback in a way that is taken constructively, positively, and which ends up, improving the morale and the confidence of your employees. Third, it needs people acumen. You need to have that sensitivity to people. You need to understand the psychology of people. You need to have an acumen, just the way you need to have business acumen. I think something which is of great importance to leaders is people acumen. And often than not, organizations talk about and organizations emphasize on business acumen, but very few organizations really emphasize on their leaders having people acumen. I think you just cannot be a good feedback giver if you lack people acumen. The fourth is empathy. I think, right, putting yourself into somebody's shoes and thinking from their perspective is what empathy is all about. As a leader, when you are dealing with people in your team who are low on performance, you need to put yourselves into their shoes, understand where they are coming from, what is the root cause, why they are not able to perform well, and how, as a leader, I can really help them improve on their performance. I think handling a top performer or a solid performer is always very easy for a leader because they are self-motivated. They are kick-ass performers. They are self-motivated. You don't really have to do anything to motivate them. But what is challenging for a leader is to really motivate the people who are low on performance. And for that, you really need to show a lot of empathy. I've seen many times leaders getting very, very critical about performance, and which is absolutely fine. But when you start criticizing performance, that's where the whole game changes. Remember, friends, it's good to be critical, but do not criticize. There is a difference. When you are critical, you are trying to help the individual. When you are criticizing, you actually tend to get personal, and that's not the objective. And hence it is an art. Showing empathy is an art. It's not a science. Well, performance feedback is something that you can completely control, and that is where it is an art. Any art form, if you're a dancer, you're a singer, you're an actor, if you are really good at what you do, you will have the ability to control it because it's in your hands. When a singer has to sing a song, he exactly knows what kind of an audience I'm delivering to. What is the scale I'm supposed to sing at? And that's where I control it. Any art can be controlled. Feedback is something which is absolutely in the control of the leader. And any art form at the end of the day always will have an element of subjectivity. For example, if you talk about the greatest actor or the greatest singer, there are people in the world who will like them and there are people in the world who will not like them. There is always an element of subjectivity involved when it comes to art. That's not the case with science. But remember, this is true for performance feedback. there will always be an element of subjectivity in the way the other individual might perceive it. And that's where I say it is an art. And the more articulate you are, the more empathy you show, the more you are in control of it, the more creative you are, remember, you will end up reducing the element of subjectivity to a great extent. And that's where we say, friends, it is an art. At the same time, it is also a science. How is it a science? Because it has a method. Anything scientific always has a method, has an approach, has principles, is a technique. And that's where we say it is also a science. We will understand this in greater detail. Where what do you mean by a method? What do you mean by a technique? And how do you approach feedback for different types of performers? We will understand this in a greater detail. But that's where this is both an art as well as a science. Because one needs to be articulate, one needs to be creative, one needs to have a people acumen, one needs to show empathy, so many things, right? Art has different shades, science doesn't. Science is straightforward, it's linear. Art is non-linear. That's where we say a feedback is a great combination of art as well as a science. Let's move to the next slide. So art, because I am also an artist, I have a background in music, I sing, I'm passionate about percussion instruments. Every artist to a certain extent is mad. And that madness is important. You cannot deliver your best in any art form if you aren't mad. So you must be mad. As a leader, you need to be mad. If you want to deliver a great performance feedback, that element of madness is important. At the same time, it is a science. Well, there has to be a method too. And that's where we say feedback is about bringing method to madness. If you are absolutely mad, well, people are not going to take you seriously, right? But if you are too methodical, I think you are going to lose somewhere in between. And the message that you are wanting to give to the feedback seeker is something which will not reach to him or her. वो जो एक कहावत है ना कि आपकी बात दिल तक पहुंचनी चाहिए, तो वो बात दिल तक तब पहुंचती है जब ये मेथड और मैडनेस का कॉम्बिनेशन होता है. अगर सिर्फ मैडनेस है तो लोग आपको पागल समझेंगे, अगर सिर्फ मेथड है तब तो बात दिल तक नहीं पहुंचने वाली. See, a feedback as a process is something where you are going to touch an individual at an emotional level. Remember this, it is not just one more thing that you have to do as a leader. Rather, it is one of the most important things that you have to do as a leader. And that's why method to madness is important. And that's where art and science of feedback is actually a combination of method and madness. If you are too methodical, you'll screw your feedback. And if you're too mad, you will equally screw your feedback. So a balanced view. Apply 50% of method and 50% of madness. As a leader, you need to get the artist in you out when you're giving a feedback. But make sure that you have the right approach and you follow all the right principles and techniques. We move to the next slide. So performance feedback kaisa hona chahiye? How a performance feedback should be. And these are the 4 words that I always sum up what a performance feedback should look like. Number 1, it should be real time. कई बार लोग मुझे पूछते हैं और कई बार मैंने लीडर्स को ये असमंजस में देखा है कि when it comes to giving a positive feedback, there is no discomfort. The leaders are very happy. But when it comes to giving a negative feedback, people are uncomfortable, leaders are uncomfortable. One of the reasons is because we keep on stockpiling the feedback. A feedback should always be given on a real-time basis. Well, every organization has a practice of a half-yearly feedback and a yearly feedback. In fact, 9 or 10 organizations will have this as a standard practice. And well, that's okay. Those are two occasions where the HR function really wants you to really document your feedback. But does it stop there? Should you as a leader wait for the half-yearly review to come and then give a feedback? And the answer is a big no. Do not wait. I repeat, do not wait when it comes to giving a feedback, whether positive and more so when it is negative. If you wait for giving a positive feedback, it is still okay. Not something that I recommend, but it is still okay. But waiting to give a negative feedback and not giving it real time, well, you are actually taking away that opportunity from your subordinate to help him to improve. Remember this, every individual deserves an opportunity to reflect upon, deserves an opportunity to have enough time to improve upon his performance or her performance. And when you don't not keep it real time, you are taking away that opportunity from that individual. So that's the most important thing about feedback, real time. Number 2, candid. Well, candid is all about being honest. Number 3, constructive. Again, very, very important. And number 4, be as specific as possible. Let's go to the next slide. So as I said, what is real time? Say it when it matters. That's very, very important. This is one principle that if we apply in our personal lives and our professional lives, I think our lives are going to be really, really sorted. I think if you do not say when it matters the most, you miss the bus. And then the whole objective of performance feedback is lost. As I said already, do not procrastinate. Often than not, especially when it comes to negative feedback, I have seen 7 on 10 leaders being very, very uncomfortable. And what do we end up doing? We end up procrastinating it. ठीक है, बाद में देता हूं, बाद में देता हूं, बाद में देता हूं. ये करते करते साल का एंड आ जाता है, रेटिंग का टाइम आता है, और हम हमारे सबऑर्डिनेट को बोलते हैं तुमने अच्छा परफॉर्म नहीं किया. So procrastination, you are only further not giving an individual to improve. I urge leaders, please do not do that. And remember, anything that is done in time always has a positive impact. Now, what are the benefits? It allows time to reflect, it allows time to improve, and it leads to an increased motivation. So the first is real time. Let's move to the next slide. Let's keep it candid. Now, what is candid? Candid is being honest, being frank. Sham, we need to go to the last slide. And being straightforward. Yeah, candid is about being honest, frank, and straightforward. And what are the benefits of being candid? The benefits are help improve performance. When you're candid, when you're honest, वो कहते हैं ना कि दिल की बात दिल तक तभी पहुंचती है जब शिद्दत से उस बात को बताया जाए. वो शिद्दत तब आती है जब आपके अंदर एक लेवल ऑफ ऑनेस्टी होती है. When you're not diplomatic, when you're not trying to beat around the bush. और परफॉर्मेंस फीडबैक में वो सच्चाई होना, वो शिद्दत होना, वो सही इंटेंट होना बहुत जरूरी है. Only then you can help somebody to really improve on the performance. आप सच्चाई से जब कोई बात कहते हो तो उस बात को हमेशा सीरियसली लिया जाता है. That's the other benefit. And the third is that people appreciate that. Honest people are people who are always appreciated, loved, admired, and respected. It's a difficult thing to do. Being honest and being frank is not the easiest thing. But believe me, the people who have been successful, the people who are the most respected, they have earned that respect because of this wonderful quality of being honest. Let's move to the next slide. And that brings us, what do you mean when you say a feedback has to be constructive? Well, constructive means something when it is done with the right intent. आपका intent बहुत मायने रखता है. Is your intent to help the person to improve, or is your intent to criticize the individual? I think when you say you're trying to do something constructive, it's the intent which is the bottom line. And many a times, though we as leaders want to be constructive, we end up not being constructive because we do not focus on that bottom line called intent. So the right intent, when something is done for the good of people, when you believe, when you do something, when your action, your words are genuinely for the betterment of people, that's constructive. And constructive people are those who show a lot of empathy. And what are the benefits of it? It builds employee morale. Yeah, it really builds. Because when the other person knows that whatever this individual is doing is for my good, it builds your morale. हमने बचपन में हमारे टीचर्स से बहुत डांट खाई है, सबने कभी ना कभी, राइट? हमने हमारे पेरेंट्स से भी डांट खाई है. But have you ever heard a child saying, or a child getting into being demoralized in spite of the teacher scolding him, getting angry at him or her? Have you ever heard a parent demoralizing a child, a son or a daughter? No. And the reason is their intent behind that is absolutely for the good of that child, is for the good of the daughter, is for the good of the son. I think as leaders, if we do it with the right intent, even if we are critical, if our intent behind being critical is the right one, is to help the individual improve and not really criticize, I think that is going to lead to building up an employee morale. When you do something with a lot of positive intent, it is always appreciated. And the most important thing, when you do something with a good heart, with empathy, with intent for the good, you always build respect. Next. Well, last but not the least, a feedback has to be very, very specific, which means to the point. You can't go around making stories. Yeah. You must have you may use metaphors. I think that's a great way of giving a feedback, but do not go beating around the bush. You got to be to the point. You must use examples. You must use real life situations to explain your viewpoint. But at the same time, you can't just make stories and go on and on and on, because you will actually end up confusing the individual whom you are giving a feedback. Second, focus on the performance, not on the person. Many a times it happens that when we are giving a feedback, we derail our entire conversation, we derail our entire discussion from performance to the person. और हम उस इंसान को क्रिटिसाइज करना शुरू कर देते हैं. कई बार हम लोग ये कॉन्शियसली नहीं करते, ये हो जाता है. It happens. And that's where we need to hold ourselves. You need to control it. As I said, it's an art. I said it in the beginning. It's an art, you must control it. Focus on the performance, not on the person. At the end of the day, the intent is not to criticize the person. The intent is to be critical about the performance. And the third, it has to be measured. Yeah, Peter Drucker, the father of modern management, uh, the management guru, he said, what gets measured gets managed. Yeah, what gets measured gets managed. So if your feedback is not well measured, if it's not to the point, it's difficult for an individual to really comprehend it. Yeah, so one cannot really manage if it's not well measured. So always remember this great saying by Peter Drucker: what gets measured gets managed, and performance has to be managed. It helps you to build an improvement plan when you are to the point. Yeah, when it becomes more measurable, it helps you to show the right direction to the individual. It helps you to build the right kind of a improvement plan for the individual. That's something which is very, very important. So be specific. So I repeat, what are the 4 mantras? Real time, very important. Number 2, candid. Number 3, constructive. Number 4, specific. These are the 4 mantras of a good feedback, a good performance feedback. The next slide, please. So now we will understand how do we give feedback to different kinds of performers. Well, this is one thing that I've seen, that many times leaders use the same approach, the same method for giving feedback to all sorts of performers. Well, we do not really distinguish between the types of performers that we are dealing with. कई बार हम ये भूल जाते हैं कि मेरे सामने जो इंसान बैठा है, बैठी है, what is the type of performer? He or she a low performer, a solid performer, or a top performer? And very mechanically, in the most mundane way, we just give a feedback क्योंकि करना है, HR ने बोला है या मेरे बॉस ने बोला है, कर देते हैं, and that kind of an approach, that kind of an intent and a mindset is more harmful than helpful to people. We must understand that your approach, your technique for different kinds of performers has to be different. You cannot have one size fits all approach when it comes to giving a performance feedback. So सबसे पहले देखते हैं कि लो परफॉर्मर्स के साथ कैसे डील करना चाहिए. Well, when you are talking to a low performer, remember your feedback has to be prescriptive. मैं आपको इसका एक उदाहरण देता हूं, एक मेटाफर यूज करके. हम जब बीमार होते हैं, मैं एक लो परफॉर्मर को एक ऐसे इंसान के साथ तुलना कर रहा हूं जो शायद बीमार है, उसकी तबीयत ठीक नहीं है. तो हम क्या करते हैं, हम एक डॉक्टर के पास जाते हैं, और डॉक्टर के पास जाते हैं तो डॉक्टर क्या करता है, डॉक्टर हमको सीधे दवाई तो दे नहीं देता कि ठीक है क्रोसिन खा लो ठीक हो जाओगे, क्योंकि बुखार तो क्रोसिन से ठीक हो सकता है, डायरिया क्रोसिन से ठीक नहीं होती. राइट? मतलब ये होता है कि हर एक मर्ज का इलाज अलग है. अब वो लो परफॉर्मर क्यों है ये आपको समझना पड़ेगा. डॉक्टर क्या करता है, डॉक्टर सबसे पहले पूछता है कि भाई आप बताइए आपको तकलीफ क्या है. कोई बोलेगा मुझे सिर दर्द कर रहा है, कोई बोलेगा बुखार आ रहा है, कोई बोलेगा पेट में दर्द है. And then after understanding the problem, after a proper diagnosis, he writes a prescription for you. Right? And then when you follow what the doctor tells you to do, you become absolutely hale and hearty. आप ठीक हो जाते हो. I think that's exactly the kind of an approach that you need to take for low performers. Leaders को doctors वाला approach लेना चाहिए, और इसीलिए मैं हमेशा कहता हूं कि लो परफॉर्मर्स को प्रिस्क्रिप्टिव फीडबैक देना चाहिए. डॉक्टर क्या करता है, प्रिस्क्रिप्शन लिखता है. राइट? सो इट हैज टू बी प्रिस्क्रिप्टिव, इट हैज टू बी डिटेल्ड. You need to understand and diagnose the problem. Why is the performance low? What are the reasons? And then हेल्प द इंडिविजुअल, हैंड होल्ड द इंडिविजुअल. जो सॉलिड परफॉर्मर है उसको आपकी हेल्प की जरूरत नहीं है, वो इंडिपेंडेंटली परफॉर्म कर लेगा. बट जो लो परफॉर्मर है उसको जरूरत है. So what should be your approach? Your approach should be to help the individual. Your approach should be to handhold the individual. हम गलती क्या करते हैं कई बार एज लीडर्स, हम लो परफॉर्मर को क्रिटिसाइज करना शुरू कर देते हैं. तुमने ये नहीं किया, तुमने वो नहीं किया, तुमने ऐसे नहीं किया, तुमने वैसे नहीं किया. यू आर नॉट गुड फॉर एनीथिंग. What should we be doing? We should be being critical, not criticize. There is a difference between the two. जब हम क्रिटिकल होते हैं तो हम उस इंसान को हमेशा सही आईना दिखाते हैं कि देखो जहां पर आप ठीक नहीं कर रहे या यहां पर मुझे जरूरत लगती है आपको इंप्रूव होने की, आप यहां पर इंप्रूव करिए. बट कई बार हम सोचे समझे बिना या कई बार नॉट सो कॉन्शियसली हम क्रिटिकल से क्रिटिसिज्म की तरफ बढ़ जाते हैं. एंड दैट बिकम्स फेटल फॉर लो परफॉर्मर्स. दैट्स पॉइंट नंबर 1. Let's move to the next slide. Solid performers. Well, solid performers are solid performers, right? That's why you call them solid. और किसी भी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में अगर हम देखें तो करीब करीब 70% लोग, about 70% of people fall under this category of solid performers, or you may call them as meets expectations. Well, believe me, these are the most important people. They are the people who are actually running the organization. They are the people who are holding the organization together. And while it is important that an organization focuses on high potentials, it is important that an organization focuses on top performers. It is also important that the solid performers are not neglected. कई बार एज लीडर्स मैंने ये देखा है, मैंने ये महसूस किया है कि हम सॉलिड परफॉर्मर्स को निग्लेक्ट करते हैं. हमको लगता है ठीक है वो कर लेगा, उसको फीडबैक देने की कोई जरूरत नहीं है. It's good, yeah. Why should I waste my time giving a feedback? And well, that's the biggest mistake that we do as leaders. क्यों? क्योंकि जब आप एक सॉलिड परफॉर्मर को एक सही तरीके से फीडबैक नहीं देते हो, आप एक बहुत अच्छी अपॉर्चुनिटी खो देते हो उस सॉलिड परफॉर्मर को एक टॉप परफॉर्मर में ट्रांसफॉर्म करने की. रिमेंबर, एवरी सॉलिड परफॉर्मर हैज अ पोटेंशियल to be transformed into a top performer, provided you as the leader do your job constructively, honestly and effectively. और हमें ये लगता है कि सॉलिड परफॉर्मर सॉलिड है, मैं अपना टाइम क्यों वेस्ट करूं, और इसीलिए हम वो अपॉर्चुनिटी खो देते हैं. और ऐसे कई एग्जांपल्स हैं. आप क्रिकेटिंग जगत में देखें, स्पोर्ट्स में देखें, पॉलिटिक्स में देखें, कॉर्पोरेट में देखें. If we really focus, we invest our energies into solid performers, show them the right path, mentor them. I think this is very important. How many leaders, let's put our hand on our heart and ask this question to ourselves honestly. How many of us really take out time to mentor our people? बोलते तो हम बहुत हैं मेंटरिंग के बारे में, करते कितने लोग हैं? बहुत कम लोग हैं जो ये सही मायने में प्रैक्टिस करते हैं. सॉलिड परफॉर्मर्स वो हैं जिनको आपकी मेंटरिंग की जरूरत है. बिलीव मी, एक सही मेंटरिंग प्रोसेस के थ्रू अगर वो गुजरेंगे तो हर एक सॉलिड परफॉर्मर में वो काबिलियत है कि वो एक टॉप परफॉर्मर बन सकता है या बन सकती है. सो व्हाट शुड बी योर अप्रोच? You appreciate them, but at the same time you be constructive. You tell them what they are good at, but at the same time tell them the areas where they need to improve. Yeah, don't be always goody goody. At the same time, do not criticize. You can be critical. You must tell them that, look, while you're a solid performer, if you want to become a top performer, these are the improvement opportunities that I see, and work on these. आपने अगर मैं क्रिकेट का बहुत बड़ा फैन हूं और मैं यहाँ पर एक उदाहरण आपको देना चाहूंगा। जिन लोगों ने रोहित शर्मा को देखा है क्रिकेट खेलते हुए अपने शुरुआती दौर में, वो रोहित शर्मा बहुत अलग थे और आज का रोहित शर्मा बहुत अलग है। क्यों? एक सही मेंटरिंग प्रोसेस, जब एक सही दिशा मिलती है प्लेयर को। आप विराट कोहली के पहले के परफॉर्मेंसेस देखो और आज के विराट कोहली को देखो, बहुत फर्क है। क्यों? क्योंकि उन्हें सही दिशा दी गई। आई थिंक व्हाई महेंद्र सिंह धोनी is one of the finest captains not India but the world has ever produced is क्योंकि वो सिर्फ एक अच्छे कप्तान नहीं थे, वो एक अच्छे मेंटर थे। हीरे को तराशना पड़ता है, वरना हीरा पत्थर ही होता है। जब तक हीरे को तराशा ना जाए तब तक आपको ये पता नहीं चलता कि वो पत्थर है या वो हीरा है। So every leader must spend time to sharpen the solid performer and make the solid performer really a top performer. So appreciate, be constructive, and most important, be a mentor to your subordinates. The next slide, please. Top performers. Well, top performer कौन होता है? हुकुम का इक्का, right? The go-to man if there is any problem. The person who has a solution to probably anything and everything that happens in your team. जिसको हम तुरुप का इक्का भी बोलते हैं, right? He is the joker. Why is the joker? Because joker से शक्तिशाली पत्ता कोई होता नहीं है. I think he's your joker. He's the man who is actually holding the whole organization. He's running the whole organization. Someone who is very passionate. Someone who really puts his or her heart and soul into it. Remember, top performers are the people, who carry the organizational burden on their shoulders. They are the people who drive organizations and results with a lot of passion, dedication, and commitment. Can you neglect top performers? Well, I think this needs no guesses. The answer is no, and you should never. What you should do? How you should give a feedback to a top performer. Now, अगर आप एक top performer को prescriptive feedback दोगे, तो क्या होगा? Top performer demoralize हो जाएगा. You don't have to be prescriptive. Yeah, a top performer is all guns blazing. So when you have a top performer who is all guns blazing, and if you end up giving a prescriptive feedback to a top performer, well, it is going to prove extremely fatal. The person is going to be demoralized. Well, all you need to do is give a reinforcing feedback. Tell him or her that listen, you're a great guy, you're a great girl. I think what you're doing is phenomenal. Continue doing what you're doing. I think you're just simply good at it. At the same time, what you need to do is be a coach. कई बार ये सवाल आता है, मेंटरिंग और कोचिंग में फर्क क्या है? मेंटर का काम होता है be a friend, philosopher and a guide. वो होता है मेंटर, राइट? श्री कृष्ण जो थे वो मेंटर भी थे और वो कोच भी थे. सिमिलरली आपको एज ए लीडर एक मेंटर का काम भी करना है, कोच का काम भी करना है. मेंटर उसको करना है जो सॉलिड परफॉर्मर है. टॉप परफॉर्मर को मेंटरिंग की जरूरत नहीं है, उसको आपको कोच करना है. कोच क्या करता है? कोच asks the right questions. Well, why do you have a coach for an Indian cricket team? Does Virat Kohli not know how to bat? Does Rohit Sharma not know how to bat? These are international players. They are top quality players. You still have coaches. Why? Because the job of the coach is to ask the right question and get the best out of that individual. आज दुनिया के जो टॉप 100 फॉर्च्यून कंपनीज हैं, उनके सीईओज पर्सनल कोचेस रखते हैं. क्यों? क्या वो सीईओज इनकेपेबल हैं? Are these CEOs not capable? And the answer is, well, they are very capable. But even the most capable people need a coach, someone who is a sounding board, someone who can ask them the right questions, who can, who will allow them to reflect and keep on raising their individual benchmark. कोच सवाल पूछता है, मेंटर गाइड करता है. ये फर्क होता है कोच में और मेंटर में. एक टॉप परफॉर्मर को कोच की जरूरत है, ना कि मेंटर की. And that's the difference between a coach and a mentor. So, next. So let's sum it up, friends. And this is the last slide. Every individual is different. हमेशा याद रखिए. You know, one of our professors, when I was studying, when I was doing my master's in human resource management, the first lesson that he gave us in HR was, remember, every individual is unique. One size fits all approach does not work. That's true for feedback also. Number two, be objective. Whenever you are trying to be critical, do not criticize, but when you are trying to be critical, you must follow it with examples. Be candid and constructive. I've already told you what is candid, honest, frank, straightforward. What is constructive? Something which is for the good with the right intent. Remember, feedback is about the performance, not the person. Remember, you can be critical. Do not criticize. Last but not the least, make it real time. When it is done timely, that is when it matters the most, and that is when it has a maximum impact. Thank you, everybody, for a patient listening. Thank you, HRAI, once again, for having me here for this masterclass. Over to you, Shyam.
Thank you, sir. So should I stop sharing the screen now?
Yes, please.
Okay, so before we move ahead with the Q&A session, I would run a quick poll and would request all the participants to fill in the poll and also simultaneously put your questions in the chat window so that we can answer.
Yeah, so do we have any questions?
Yes, so we are also coming up with questions.
So Shyam, can you ask it, because I'm not able to see the questions on my chat.
I will. So at times, both roles of coach and mentor overlap, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
मैंने आपको श्री कृष्ण का एग्जाम्पल क्यों दिया महाभारत में. आप एज अ लीडर आपका you have to wear both the hats of a mentor and a coach. Remember, with what I said at the end, one size fits all doesn't work. With a top performer, you have to wear the hat of a coach. With a solid performer, you have to wear the hat of a mentor. And that's exactly what your job is as a leader. You must have, and that's where I say it's an art. ये एक आर्ट है, आपको हैट स्विच करनी पड़ेगी. Mentor to coach, coach to mentor.
Great. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would also request to put all the questions now. Okay, so we have our next question from Shirish. Whether good listening on the part of leader is also required to become good mentor or a coach? Okay.
Whether it is required, मेरे हिसाब से ये optional है ही नहीं. You must have this quality of listening. I think a leader is never going to be a good leader if he or she is not a good listener. For you to communicate something effectively, you must first have the ability to listen it properly. जिसको हम बोलते हैं listen with an intent. There is a difference between hearing and listening. Do not hear, listen, and listen with an intent. When you listen someone with the right intent, वो जो जगजीत सिंह की एक गजल है ना, बात निकलेगी तो फिर एक दूर तलक जाएगी. वो दूर तलक तभी जाएगी जब आप उसको अच्छे से सुनोगे. You must listen well to make it articulate and to really make it really good, effective.
Okay, great. So we have next question from Rhythm Talreja. What kind of questions should we ask to the top performers in general while coaching?
Well, it really depends on what the person, who the person is and what kind of a role the individual is into. But to sort of generally, tell you as an example, okay, you've reached here from what you've done. What according to you should do so that you're able to now take your performance to the next level? Make him think. Ask open-ended questions. दो तरह के questions होते हैं. एक होता है क्लोज एंडेड क्वेश्चंस जिसमें आप एक्सपेक्ट करते हो कि आंसर यस और नो में आए, और एक होता है ओपन एंडेड क्वेश्चन where you are making that individual, you're forcing that individual to think. What you have done here, wait, there's this beautiful saying, what got you here won't get you there. And that's exactly what you need to ask your top performer. You've done everything great for reaching where you are. Now, to go to the next level, what do you need to do? What do you think you need to do? What do you think? How can you up your game? What do you think? Which are the areas where you can improve? Right? Ask open-ended, impactful questions.
So next question is from Vanita. How do we ensure that our feedback is aligned to growth mindset and there is no blind spots?
Sorry, say it again.
How do we ensure that our feedback is aligned to growth mindset and there is no blind spots?
Well, the answer lies with you as a leader. First and foremost, many leaders expect that my subordinate should have a growth mindset. My subordinate should listen to my feedback if I am critical about it. I want to ask a question to you. Do you have a growth mindset? It all starts with you as a leader. It's a culture. Growth mindset is a culture. As a leader, अगर आपके अंदर ही growth mindset नहीं होगा तो वो नीचे कल्टीवेट कैसे होगा? मैंने कई सारे लीडर्स को देखा है ग्रोथ माइंडसेट के बारे में बात करते हुए. मैंने कई सारे लीडर्स को देखा है ये बोलते हुए कि मेरा सबऑर्डिनेट जो है वो मेरा फीडबैक पॉजिटिवली नहीं लेता या नहीं लेती. अगर मैं ये सवाल आपसे पूछता हूं कि आपका लीडर अगर आपको एक क्रिटिकल परफॉर्मेंस फीडबैक दे, क्या आपके अंदर वो क्षमता है उस फीडबैक को पॉजिटिवली लेने की? अगर नहीं है तो दूसरों से एक्सपेक्ट करना बंद कर दीजिए. It all starts with you. If you have a growth mindset, that's where you will cultivate that mindset. You cannot expect it from people if you do not have it in you.
Great. So next question is from Shweta. What can leaders do?
What can leaders do? Well, leaders can do everything, right? Look at the best of the leaders in the world today. Yeah. Well, I'm not referring to a few people, but I must refer to a few people also. I mean, look at Mahendra Singh Dhoni. Look at what Steve Jobs did. Look at Jack Welch. Yeah. Look at J.R.D. Tata. Look at Ratan Tata. I mean, being a leader, believe me, is the most difficult thing. By designation, by the years of experience, by the virtue of experience, तो आप leader बन जाओगे. 10 साल, 15 साल, 20 साल आप वाइस प्रेसिडेंट तो बन जाओगे, सीनियर वाइस प्रेसिडेंट बन जाओगे, प्रेसिडेंट भी बन जाओगे, एमडी भी बन जाओगे. डेजिग्नेशन से लीडर बनना और माइंडसेट से लीडर बनने में फर्क है. लीडर को क्या करना चाहिए? वेल, लीडर को कोच बनना चाहिए, लीडर को मेंटर करना चाहिए, लीडर को एम्पैथी दिखानी चाहिए, लीडर के पास विजन होना चाहिए, लीडर के पास एक स्ट्रेटेजिक माइंडसेट होना चाहिए, लीडर के पास बिजनेस एक्यूमेन होना चाहिए, लीडर के पास पीपल एक्यूमेन होना चाहिए. वेल, द लिस्ट इज एंडलेस. और इसीलिए कहते हैं कि लीडर बाय डेजिग्नेशन बनना तो आसान है, बन जाओगे, किसी ना किसी दिन तो बन ही जाओगे. लीडर बाय माइंडसेट बनना बहुत डिफिकल्ट है, बिकॉज यू हैव टू हैव एंड एज अ लीडर जो सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट क्वालिटी है कि जब आप सक्सेसफुल हो तो श्रेय अपनी टीम को दो, और जब आप फेल होते हो तो पूरा श्रेय खुद पर लो. ये हिम्मत बहुत कम लोगों में होती है. देयर आर वेरी फ्यू पीपल हु हैव द गट्स टू स्टैंड बाय देयर टीम व्हेन देयर टीम फेल्स. कहना बहुत आसान है, करना बहुत मुश्किल है. Very few people have the guts, and very few people also have the large heart to give the credit to the team when the team succeeds. हम क्या करते हैं, जब कुछ अच्छा हुआ, अरे मैंने किया, I did it. It was under my able leadership. And when something fails, no, it was because of the team. Well, I think leadership is a huge responsibility, friends. Believe me, being a leader by designation is very easy. Being a leader by mindset is very, very, very difficult.
Well said, Ron. So Shweta has a follow-up question. What should leader do when employees do not take feedback positively?
Well, जैसे मैंने कहा कि you will have to really understand that why is the individual not taking the feedback positively. मैंने मेरे सेशन में एक उदाहरण दिया था कि कई बार many a times people take your feedback negatively. You know why? Because we as leaders have a tendency to keep on delaying the feedback. You know, we procrastinate it. And when we give a feedback, we don't realize when we stop being critical and when we start criticizing somebody. And when you do that, that is where your feedback will not be taken positively. You know, at the end of the day, it's about doing something with the right intent. If your parents give you a negative feedback, do you get demoralized? Do you feel bad about it? नहीं, शायद दो मिनट के लिए आपको बुरा लगता है, क्षण भर के लिए, लेकिन आपको पता है, in at the back of your mind, you know, my parents want good for me. उन्होंने अगर मुझे कोई चीज कही है, if they are critical, वो मेरे भले के लिए है. It's for my own good. I have a question for all the leaders. Have you really built that confidence in your team? कि मेरा लीडर अगर मुझे कुछ बोलेगा तो मुझे पूरा भरोसा है कि मेरे अच्छे के लिए बोलेगा. और ये कॉन्फिडेंस दिलाना, ये सबऑर्डिनेट की रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी नहीं है, ये एज अ लीडर आपकी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी है, आपका दायित्व है.
Great, great. So since the answer was on the leadership, there is a question from Vandana. Sir, you mean to say that leader has to be perfect always?
Well, there is nobody ever born on this earth who's been perfect, right? But what a good leader does is, a good leader learns from his mistakes or her mistakes. They reflect, they learn, they raise their benchmark, not comparing with anybody else, comparing to themselves. They try and improve every single day. No one is perfect. You know, if you consider the most admired leaders in the world, right, whether it is Shri Narendra Modi, whether it is Bill Gates, whether it is Barack Obama, whether it is Mahendra Singh Dhoni, none of these are perfect leaders. Well, while they have a huge fan following, there are people who also criticize them. It's not about being perfect. It's about learning. It's about reflecting. It's about improving. It's about constantly raising your benchmark to be a better leader.
Great, great. So there is a question from Radhika. Can the often notoriously acknowledged grapevine be used as method to seek and give feedback, as I feel that it comes only second to the transparent feedback?
Well, grapevine is something which can be used, I do not deny, but must be used with a lot of caution. And as a leader, first and foremost, you need to have that maturity to really filter out that grapevine. Because many a times, everything that is said or which comes to your ears through a grapevine may not always be true. Many a times it might be done with a wrong intent. There might be a political intent. There might be hatred. There might be personal animosity. So as a leader, you must be matured and you must use grapevine very, very consciously. Do not believe everything that is said about you. So use it to give a feedback. Nothing wrong in it, but use it very, very cautiously.
Great. Saron, do we have time to take another question? It's 4 p.m. already.
Well, Shyam, it's your forum. You decide if we have the time or not.
Sir,
I
it's
can take one or two more questions. I don't mind.
Great, great. So, okay, there is a question from Omita Jain. How do you gauge your leadership skill that increases chance of being a coach?
Well, I think, uh, you know, it's difficult to put yourself, if you really have to sort of measure that where am I on a scale of 10? Where am I on a scale of 100? When it comes to coaching, you know, thankfully today you have the International Coach Federation, and a lot of institutions which are actually teaching coaching. Coaching is again a science and an art, not something which you can just do just like that. Unfortunately, and I'm saying this on a forum, that coaching today is the most abused word. हर कोई बोलता है कि मैं कोच हूं, पर कोचिंग इतना आसान नहीं है. कोचिंग सीखना पड़ता है. यू हैव टू लर्न कोचिंग. यू हैव टू, जैसे कोई आर्ट फॉर्म होता है ना, अगर आपको पियानो सीखना है, आपको गाना सीखना है, आपको एक्टिंग सीखनी है, आपको सीखना पड़ेगा. यू नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड द साइंस बिहाइंड एक्टिंग. यू नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड द साइंस बिहाइंड म्यूजिक. देयर इज अ साइंस बिहाइंड कोचिंग. You just cannot be a coach just like that. Every great cricketing captain is not necessarily a good coach, because as a captain you might be a great leader, not necessary that you might end up being a good coach tomorrow. So you'll have to learn it. And today, honestly, there are a lot of institutions which run a lot of training programs, so I recommend you go and learn. But yes, everybody can be a coach if you have the right intent and if you're passionate about it.
So this is one last question from Deepak Gupta. Can you please share your insight on feedback to an individual who was in race for the post of manager, but somehow someone else get that position now, and no matter
Sorry,
how
what did you say, Sham?
so,
In
there
the
was
what?
the person A was in the race for the post of manager, but person B got the position, and
Right.
no matter how real the feedback the new manager gave, it didn't make the impact on that person. So
Well, if you give a genuine feedback, and most importantly, a constructive one, ऐसा हो ही नहीं सकता that the feedback will not be taken in the right spirit. Remember, if there are two managers, manager A and manager B, first of all, in your heart as a leader, this is what you need to ask yourself. Am I convinced as a leader that the manager B deserves this position over manager A? Are you convinced? ये सबसे पहले ये सवाल खुद से पूछिए. And if you are convinced, why are you convinced? What are the reasons behind being convinced? Right? If you are convinced, then convincing somebody else is never a problem. The problem starts when you are subjective, you are on a loose footing, you are not convinced, and then you have to convince somebody. And that's where your feedback doesn't sound convincing. So you have to be, first, you need to convince yourself. And number two, you need to put the points to manager A, who could not actually take up that position, in a very, very measurable and a very quantifiable manner. That look, this is where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is where the other person was able to take up this position, and this is where you fell short. You need to be objective enough, and you need to use the right examples. You can quote situations. You must quote the examples, that where you feel that that individual deserved as comparison to you. See, if somebody is not better, there has to be an objective reason. You cannot say that, मुझे लगा नहीं होता. You have to be constructive. At the same time, you have to be objective. And if you are convinced, you will be able to convince.
true. So there are a couple of more questions which we have received, but looking at time constraints, we will share this question directly with Rohan to answer. And thank you, Rohan, for such an insightful session. Feedback must be candid, real time, and constructive, specific, and should always be linked to performance and not the person. Rohan, truly it was a pleasure being with you today, and I'm sure all our participants had a great learning about delivering feedbacks.